Hey dancers, welcome to the show. I'm Julie and I'm your host today on this episode of Broche Banter. In this season, we're talking all about ballet training, specifically for grown-ups. I'll be sharing my philosophy on why ballet should be for everyone, how to train in order to reach a high level in ballet, how adults can actually learn classical ballet technique with fully formed bodies and busy lives, and how we can make amazing changes to the ballet world to open its doors to more adults like us. Together, we're on the path to making ballet mainstream, making it normal to learn ballet as an adult, making it a part of the fabric of our society like cycling, rock climbing, yoga, and martial arts. So come along this ride with me, and let's dance. First of all, thank you for your patience with this episode's release. I've been hard at work launching the first annual International Adult Ballet Festival, an intensive showcase and competition for serious recreational adult ballet dancers to call their home. Ballet is a legitimate and prestigious passion for adults of all ages and skill levels to pursue with all of their heart, regardless of aspirations of professional dancing. The International Adult Ballet Festival is an opportunity to experience the intensives, performing, and competition opportunities typically reserved only for young dancers. I would love to meet you on the stage in Miami in 2022. All levels are invited to join and perform, whether you've got your heart set on a solo, a group piece with your friends, or dance as part of the Broche Corps de Ballet. Choose to stay in our group hotel block, slumber party, or stay on your own and join for the classes and the show. Registration is now open at iabf.dance. That's iabf.dance. All right, let's get on to this episode. Facet number 3, depth of technique, the invisible key to ballet. This episode, like all episodes, depends on you, your goals, and what you want from ballet. If you listen to this episode and this facet isn't exciting to you, that's fine. You don't need to achieve a high level of this facet to have fun with ballet. You definitely want to be familiar with the basics of technique in order to stay safe, but plenty of people out there love ballet without studying this facet deeply. It's perfectly valid to dance because you love ballet class, because you enjoy moving with the music, or being in the studio environment with your ballet friends. But if you've been dancing for a while and wonder why your pirouettes aren't working yet, why your petite allegro isn't getting any quicker, why your legs won't stay turned out in the center, why you can't get your extensions higher, or why your port de bras doesn't look quite right, then this is the facet for you. Facet number 3, depth of technique, the invisible key to ballet. Let's dive right in. What is depth of technique all about? This facet is where we take each movement within the breadth of vocabulary and work on it until mastery. We go deep. As we discussed in the second facet of ballet, the breadth of vocabulary involves knowing which foot to put where, how to link the steps together, and what each of the steps mean. Depth, on the other hand, is where we work to master the movements within the ballet paradigm, which involves turned out legs, pointed ankles, long toes, stretched knees, elongated posture, and arm movements to extend our lines from our back and create gestures. Within the facet of depth, we build the mechanisms that make ballet look and work correctly. The depth of technique enables us to create the look of effortless elegance while secretly and invisibly working really hard to control the body. The depth of technique enables us to use gravity and physics to our advantage to turn, leap, lift our legs high, and more. And it is what gives ballet the look of gracefulness and the je ne sais quoi of floating across the stage. So I call this developing ballet mode. Let's take this conversation back down to earth and talk about what this means in a practical sense. First off, I'm a big believer that you shouldn't just take my word or any teacher's word for this stuff. You should prove it to yourself. Try to understand the logic of it all. Understand the theory behind it. Then you can self-correct. You can keep learning in group class where individual corrections aren't given. You can watch videos of yourself dancing to make progress and correct yourself. So I hope that this episode and this whole season arms you with the knowledge of what we are trying to learn with ballet technique to give you the tools to keep learning and growing. So when we train the facet of depth, we are ultimately teaching the body how to move with a different set of muscles than what we use in our normal life. This is where we develop a second set of movement patterns. We all have one movement pattern already, which is how we get around in our normal life. Let's call it human mode. Human mode involves a set of physical principles of how our body interacts with the world that we develop from infancy. This includes things like walking, jumping, crawling, stepping over puddles, picking things up, sitting in and getting up from chairs, communicative gestures, and talking with our hands. Make no mistake, a human body is heavy. but yet we move it around this world with ease. How is that? Walking is not easy because your legs are light. Walking is easy because of the physics and the technique and how your body is designed to work with gravity. Your foot is a pendulum and swings in your hip to achieve a step. Like a swing set, it's not difficult to get the swing to move forward once you pull it back and release it. In the same way, it's not difficult to walk when your leg is lifted and then your foot swings forward like a pendulum. So this facet of depth of technique is about building up a second set of movement patterns, ballet mode. In developing ballet mode, we need to circumvent our body's dominant movement pattern to build a new way to exist in the world. We need to teach smaller muscles to do the work that bigger muscles normally do. We need to teach a new set of muscles to work together to achieve tasks that they don't normally do in your daily life. We need to teach these muscles how to move our limbs in a new way without relying on the same principles of physics and efficiency that we are used to. When we enter ballet mode and turn our legs in the hip socket, aka turnout, and we move our arms from our backs, we lose some key strategies that our body has so skillfully developed. First, we lose the hip hinge. This is where the hips rock or hinge back and then can thrust forward. This is basically how we get up from chairs, squat, lift heavy things, and generate power to jump. But because the hip hinge relies on our feet pointing forward so that we can rock our hips back and then push them forward, once our feet are turned sideways, there's nowhere to balance that forward and backward movement. Once we turn our legs out, we then need to teach our body where power comes from without the classic human hip hinge. We need to develop a new strategy for power. The hip hinge loves to creep into our pirouettes, our jumps, and our point work because it's naturally how we humans generate momentum. In the absence of a new strategy for developing power, the body will always fall back on what it knows. Second, we lose our normal balancing mechanism, which is to move forward and back with soft knees. Why does this strategy work so well for human mode? Because our feet point forward and our knees bend in that same direction. This allows us to balance because our knees, ankles, and hips can absorb any wobbles and micro movements in our body. But when our legs are turned out, our knees and ankles cannot manage this forward and back movement because when they are turned out, bending the knees doesn't result in forward back motion. And besides, we have to keep our legs super stretched in ballet anyways. So we need to teach our body how to balance without feet that point forward to accommodate for this forward back movement and adjusting that we're so used to using in human mode. We need to develop a new balancing strategy and how to develop and generate vertical forces and rotational forces to keep us balanced. For example, we say cues like lifting through the top of the ears, shoulders down, stomach lifting up, kneecaps pulling up, front of the hips up, tailbone down, toes pressing down, arches lifting up. You notice these are all vertical forces. These are vertical words. We also need to learn how to generate equivalent rotational force in opposite directions to help us stabilize. For example, we generate a slight rotation of the obliques to balance out the leg in all seconde or passé. We learn to develop equal and opposite turnout and rotation of the hips in both directions to balance all of the positions on one leg. And third, we lose our normal way of moving our arms. When we talk and communicate, we explore our world with our hands. We reach for something with our hands. But with ballet, we need to think of our hands as secondary, as coming along with the arm. The upper back, the upper arm, the shoulder move, and the hand follows. The hand doesn't lead with ballet. It does gesture, but it's not what initiates the movement. It's an afterthought. This is a huge part of the effortless look of it all, that our hands are coming along for the ride and not the thing doing the moving. So in developing ballet mode, picture a movie about a dysfunctional team of misfits who need to come together to beat the well-oiled machine of skilled players. It'll take a dedicated and enthusiastic coach, aka your positive mindset, a lot of hard work, and a good montage. So let's take a concrete example. Let's compare the mechanics of ballet walking with that of human walking. First, in ballet walking, there's no pendulum. Your leg is not swinging in the hip. Ballet walking is all musculature and involves no gravity to make your momentum. The leg is completely controlled as it moves forward to step on. When you pick up your leg in human mode as a person, the muscles on the top will be the ones to lift, aka the quads and the hip flexors. But when your leg is turned out and in ballet mode, The muscles on the top will be different ones, namely the inner thighs and sartorius are going to start coming into the picture. Therefore, there will be one set of muscles involved with keeping your legs rotated and another set to lift them. Neither of these sets are the muscles that you would normally lift your legs with. They're not used to it. And the thing is, the ones that are already really good at it would rather just do the job for you. Second, the motion of the knee and foot is different. In regular human walking, the knee comes forward first. The knee is the first thing to pass by your other leg, and then the foot swings through linearly from back to front. But with ballet walking, your knee stays back and allows your foot to be the first thing to pass your other leg. The path of the foot is more circular than linear. But your knee is a linear joint, and it only hinges. If your knee moves circularly or twists, we have a big problem. That's why skiing injuries are so problematic, because they involve twisting of the knee. Therefore, the only way for your knee to make a circle in order to achieve ballet walking is to involve the hip, which adds more axes of movement. So when you integrate the movement of your femur bone in your hip joint, you can make your foot move in a circle. Therefore, when your knee is turned out to the side, using your hip, you can move your foot in a circle to have the action of presenting your foot to the front and then stepping on it. Third, the mechanics of propulsion are very different. When you're walking in human mode, you can simply lean forward and your legs will follow. The leaning action will cause gravity to help you move. But with ballet walking, you need to propel yourself from your back foot, your back toes, and leg. You need to push and propel yourself from the back foot onto the front foot, not fall onto the front foot. A body is pretty heavy, remember? So this actually isn't a trivial task to push your body without the help of gravity. Fourth, balance is difficult because your feet are sideways. If you push too far forward or not far enough, you don't have any leeway. You either get right onto the foot or you stumble. Without having that little quote-unquote landing strip of a parallel foot, there's less room for error. Stepping onto a turned out leg requires the utmost precision in momentum, whereas stepping onto a parallel foot is more forgiving if you push a little too hard or not hard enough. Not to mention that when you put your weight onto a turned out leg, there's a different set of muscles responsible for keeping the hip stable on top of the femur bone. So to step onto a turned out leg is a challenging proposition. And finally, if we're doing a gestural port de bras with our walking, our mind thinks about the hands leading the communication. But this will cause the arms to move in a way that we don't want for ballet. If we lift our arms from our hands, the elbows will drop to point to the floor instead of staying lifted. The wrists will be overly active instead of simply being the connection that holds your hand to your arm. The gestures will look distinctly human and not balletic. A lack of gracefulness, or when we say awkwardness, oftentimes comes when human mode and ballet mode get intertwined. When human mode tries to take over, when momentum is coming from somewhere in human mode, but the legs are trying to be turned out, or if the mind is moving the hands but not the arms, often when something just doesn't look right, it's because these two modes are mixed. Words like clumsy, awkward, messy, and sloppy are all often used to describe this mixing of modes. We can feel that the intention of the movement isn't right, even though it's difficult to pinpoint why. So how do we develop ballet mode? Through bar work. We develop these motor patterns holding onto the bar because of risk, fear, and our natural responses. When we turn out our legs, we immediately put the body into a confusing and risky state. It may seem inconsequential, as it is kind of a small change, but I hope from that whole first section that we went through that you're starting to see how big of a deal it is for your body to be able to move with turned out legs. Everything is new, everything is different, and nothing is familiar. The body doesn't have strategies for power, balance, or control. Thus, we hold on to the bar so that our body can learn to develop these new stabilization techniques and movement patterns without reverting to our default human mode. If we are afraid to fall, our body will never allow us to shut off human mode. Your body will always try to protect you from falling and from getting hurt. Holding on to the bar allows us to get the body to trust us enough to build up a new movement pattern. Especially as adults, the older we get, the more afraid we are to fall. And the more afraid we are to fall, the more our natural responses will try to protect us. When we turn the legs out without holding on to anything in the center, the body is that much more likely to revert back to human mood to try to save you from falling. There are some things we can only learn in the center, obviously, like much of the breadth of vocabulary, how we move across the floor, link the steps together, but there are others that we can really only learn at the bar, like power, balance, and how to carry the legs and maintain rotation in all the different positions. The thing is, your body is really clever. It is designed to be efficient. It is designed to make movement easier, so we don't need as much food to survive and we don't need to use as much energy, especially by the time we've reached adulthood. Honestly, if you've survived until this age, this moment to listen to this podcast episode, your body knows how to make your life easier and keep you from hurting yourself. It's going to be very quick to reverting back to human mode without you even noticing. So we need to tell the body, teach the body that we are safe, that we are using these obscure muscles. We need to constantly remind the body to maintain our core, our turnout, so that our body doesn't switch them off and just go back to default. So it can be a little esoteric how bar work works to make your center better. So in the beginning, you might remember I said, if you've been dancing for a while and you wonder why your pirouettes aren't working, your petite, allegro, your legs won't stay higher, all that good stuff, let's get into that part. So one of the great benefits to me of being a ballet teacher who started ballet as a near adult, age 17, is that I remember the beginning. I remember being so confused about what we were doing at the bar. It seemed completely unrelated to the center and completely not like anything you see on the stage. And the bar work seemed to have no impact on what was going on in the center. Perhaps you're wondering the same thing. Perhaps your teacher has told you that tendus are the key to pirouettes and that has made very little sense to you. And the thing is, bar is unrelated to center if you look at it from one perspective, which is the vocabulary and breadth. Yes, it's true that if you want to understand the 8 body positions and learn tombe, pas de bourrée, and a waltz turn, you need to spend a lot of time in the center. But that's facet number 2, breadth of vocabulary. At the bar, we are learning facet number 3, depth of technique. We are developing the invisible key to ballet. It's invisible because you won't know it's working until much later. It takes a pretty long time to develop ballet mode. In the same way that it takes a kid a pretty long time to develop how to walk. As I mentioned in the last episode, ballet is so unique in that we need to learn 2 things in our training, not only this new movement pattern and how to dance. We need to learn depth of technique and breadth of vocabulary. So how does bar work actually work? We need to show our body the collection of muscles that needs to work together to accomplish a specific goal. Remember that analogy of the team of misfits? Well, that kind of comes into play here. At the bar, we bend our legs, we come in and out of 5th position, we releve, we brush the floor to generate speed, we lift the legs, we kick the legs, we teach the ankles to point every time we leave the floor, and we keep our arms held through it all. What we're doing is we're trying to train the body to move our legs and arms in all the possible ways that they can possibly move while they're externally rotated. So as an example, stand in parallel and think of all the ways you can move your body. Now turn out your legs and move your body in each of these ways. Now you have come up with all the things we do at bar. When our legs are rotated, they don't really know how they're supposed to lift. They only know which muscles normally lift in human mode. So we need to show the legs which muscle is even capable of lifting the leg. How would your legs even know how to do this, right? It's not something that they do in their daily life. Also, when the upper arm is rotated and the shoulder blades are down and wide, we need to show your arms how to move and which group of muscles even does that job. And then we need to train the body to do that every single time in every single moment of a movement. Another thing we're doing is training our body what to do when the going gets tough. Most importantly, we are training our body how to respond to different situations and develop strategies to correct problems that might arise. Think of any kind of training. What is it? Well, it's not just what to do when things are easy. Driving is easy on a straight and open road. But what do you do when pedestrians are running out and cars are weaving and it's snowing? First responders look at a burning building and they take a different action than I would. A paramedic would pull up to a car accident and approach this situation much differently than I would. Adrenaline is racing, the situation is complicated, but that's where training comes in. They are trained to know what to do in different situations, trained to respond to pressures, problems, and challenges. So what is training? Training is taking your natural response to something and putting space before you act so you can decide what to do instead. Imagine training a dog to override their response and do something else. For example, when I feed my dogs, I put the bowl down and I ask them to wait before they eat. They struggle. They really want to eat right away. But they put space between their natural response, which is to leap for the food, and they make a choice about what to do. All right, so maybe ballet isn't as intense as those examples of the first responder and the paramedic, but it's the same idea when it comes to your physical safety and sometimes your mental safety if you're afraid of messing up or looking silly. Your body has a very strong natural response to protect you. You have a natural response, which is often to lift the shoulders, to contract the core and hunch into a fetal position, to hinge the hips back, to lift the legs from the quads, and everything we talked about in the first bit of human mode. So when we put the body in increasingly challenging situations, for example, as the bar progresses, dégagé is more challenging than tendu in that it's a stretch and a lift. We want to teach the body how to continue reacting to these difficulties in the way of ballet mode and not to simply allow the leg to turn in and lift from the muscles that normally lift it. If we put the body into a balance, we want to teach it how to stabilize. It doesn't know how to stabilize in these ballet positions. In retiré, for example, we need to develop strategies. Think back to the vertical and rotational cues that I mentioned earlier. So rotating the standing leg and hip, pulling the inner thigh forward, wrapping under the glutes while simultaneously lifting the inner thigh of the retiré, dropping back of the working hip under and pressing the knee back. Then you have all those vertical forces lifting up through the ears, shoulders down, stomach lifting up, kneecaps pulling up, toes pressing down, heel lifting up. And so in a balance at the end of a combination, it's more than a balance. It's teaching your body how to correct. So when you fall backwards, what are the strategies for generating more consistent up and down momentum to combat that backwards movement? Where is the placement to stack your body up to mitigate the forward back movement in the first place? Another thing we need to teach our body about is power. So power, how do you get power from the shoulders and the hips in ballet mode? It looks way different than in human mode. Our natural protective response will be to pull the shoulders up, but in ballet, we need our lats and our back to be ready for action. So we want them actually pulling the shoulders down and supporting the shoulders in that way. And when we plie, our body would much prefer that it was a squat with a hip hinge. So how do you get power and momentum without the hinge, right? How do you get power and momentum in a plie without a hip hinge? We get it from a different place, from the inner thighs lifting up, from the calves, from the rotators right under the glutes. And if we're jumping, we also get it from our feet and ankles. This is a huge part of why pirouettes are so difficult for adults to maintain technique and therefore to land, to do multiples and more. The fear response and protective mechanisms are extremely powerful in a pirouette. The older we get, the less amenable we are to falling, and one of the sensations and signals that you're about to fall is dizziness. We are very averse to the sensation of dizziness and spinning, so in a pirouette, the body will revert to human mode very quickly to protect us. Building proprioception, which is your brain's ability to know where your body is in space, often we train this with our eyes closed in a balance, is so important for building confidence to overcome this difficulty. Also, as crazy as it might sound, just practicing being dizzy, spinning in a circle in parallel to get used to the sensations, sitting in an office chair and spinning in a circle, and making that feeling not so foreign so that your body will be less likely to override ballet mode with human mode immediately. We want to take the fear and the danger feeling out of that so that we can maintain our turnout, our rotation, and all of those things from ballet mode. So speaking of pirouettes, I want to take a brief moment to note the difference between the type of skill that gives us pirouettes versus the type of skill that gives us something like extensions. So I think of these different skills as precision moves versus power moves. So I did powerlifting for a while on a break from ballet in my early 20s, and from my experience with this, powerlifting is things like squatting, deadlifting, and bench press. In comparison, you have things like Olympic lifting, which is like a snatch or a clean and jerk. Now, powerlifting requires sheer will, strength, and determination. I mean, there's of course technique involved to do it safely and correctly, but you can just muscle out the movements. More muscle equals more weight lifted. But with Olympic lifting, it requires precision. It's precise, detailed, and your muscles can't save you if the detail and finesse isn't there. There's so many moving body parts and elements of physics that need to align precisely at the right time to make the weight go up. You must learn which muscles to hold, which muscles to release, and then coordinate that timing precisely. Every time. There's technique, strength, precision, coordination, timing, and trust. Ballet moves are kind of like this too. I think of power moves as things like développés, grand pliés, big jumps in all seconde, or big, powerful movements. Precision moves are things like pirouettes, saut de chat, and point work. Power versus precision. Timing versus muscle. All of it needs strength and technique, but it's applied very differently in these cases. With the power moves like développés and grand pliés, the more flexible you are and the more muscle you have, the higher that leg can go. Obviously, we need technique to be able to place it all correctly to get it there, but it's less about timing and more about strength, flexibility, and that sheer will of determination to get the leg up there and hold it up there. With precision moves like pirouettes and big leaps, these require timing. The thing is, gravity is constant, right? It never gets tired, so we must always lift our bodies in opposition to gravity. And that's part of why ballet is so hard, but honestly, ballet only works in a world with gravity. The moves require momentum. They require you to push off from something. And when you learn to coordinate your body together, gravity becomes your ally. When you discover alignment, you learn how gravity helps your balance. When you discover how the coordination of your limbs and your trunk produce momentum, you learn how gravity helps you turn and jump. And when your body itself is working and gravity is working together, not in opposition, this is when we find gracefulness and fluidity in our movements. When every part of your body is working simultaneously towards a common goal, that's when you feel like you're floating and when it looks like you're weightless. Golfers use their hips. Boxers, skiers, actions like throwing, hitting, leaping, and generating momentum all come from the hips. These are all technique precision moves. In every sport, we use our hips, and so do us dancers. It's just that our hips are quietly being used, the invisible key to ballet. We need to calibrate precisely how and in what direction and how much force it takes to launch up into a pirouette or up onto our point shoes. Sometimes we go not enough, sometimes too much, sometimes too far forward, sometimes too far back. It's like there's all these tiny knobs to turn and fine tune. But again, the time to train your body on how to keep ballet mode intact, your posture and your turnout, is not in the midst of a precision move. That's like learning to change lanes for the first time on the highway. It's not the time, and it relies on patterns you've already built. Let's take a step back a little bit and talk about turnout. This is a huge part of ballet mode and something that mystifies adults everywhere. First of all, with ballet, everything looks easy. But it's not. Just to be clear, I hear this a lot. I've been doing this for a long time. I should be better at it already. Or why won't my legs just stay turned out? Well, the answer is because it's hard. Perhaps by now you're starting to understand why it's so difficult and that it's not just turning your legs out. It's about more than that. It's about completely circumventing your body's natural responses and mechanisms. Turnout is an active movement because at every second, literally at every second, anytime the going gets tough, your body is trying to return back to its normal state of parallel. It's desperately trying to return to a state of efficiency. It's not like we turn out our legs at the beginning of a combination and then we're done. It's every second, both legs, always trying to turn them out more. Training turnout is not about the amount of turnout, but the direction and the fact that energy is expended to trying to turn the legs out that will activate the muscles that we need. I can't hammer this point enough. Your legs are always, always, always trying to get back to parallel. Therefore, you must always, always, always expend force and energy to try to keep your legs turned out. It would be like if you were pushing something heavy up a hill, let's say a car. You could be exerting force with all of your might, and the car might just be staying still. But the second you stop exerting that force, the car will immediately roll back down the hill. Same thing with your legs. The second you stop exerting turnout force, your legs will return back to their natural state. So what matters is the fact that you are continually asking your body to turn out the legs in so many different scenarios at the bar. This is how you teach your body that it's what you want. It doesn't necessarily matter how far they turned, but that they turned. That you are showing your body that you want your legs to maintain their turnout. Second of all, we're training our posture and our hips. We must learn to hold the spine upright and keep the hips in place. The pelvis must be in a quote-unquote neutral position, which almost never feels neutral unless you've trained your hips to be there. We must also train our core to brace against movement. While we are dancing, there's a lot of movement. Our legs are flying around every which way, our arms are moving, we're turning, we're jumping, and it's a lot going on. Our body, the part between our shoulders and our hips, needs to be strong and stable. Not rigid, but stable. This is again a very active thing. It's not that you engage your core once and it remains as such. You must train your core to stay active for a very long time while other things are trying to coax it to let go. In ballet class, it's difficult to engage a muscle that you've never felt before. Ballet itself doesn't put you in positions where your muscles have to naturally fire. Like if you're doing a wall squat, your quads are going to fire because they have no choice, but ballet isn't like this. You have to fire the muscles up yourself. But if you've never felt what it's like to have these deep muscles fired, it can be difficult to recreate that feeling on your own. We're going to touch on this topic in the cross-training episode, but for now, just keep that thought in the back of your head. So the question on everyone's mind, can adults learn ballet? I don't mean the basics. I mean the higher level stuff. Can an adult learn ballet and dance at a high level? I say yes. But how adults learn it is very different from how kids learn it. In the same way as kids absorb languages like a sponge, adults learning a language need a very different kind of training. As a child, it's very easy to learn languages and change your speaking accent. As an adult, this is much more difficult, but it's not impossible. It simply requires a different kind of training than for kids. Kids will simply pick up an accent, but adults will need to study it. Adults will need to learn the mechanics of pronunciation, where your tongue goes in your mouth to make a specific sound, how to hear the difference between the sounds, how to know if you have successfully made a sound. Adults will study the grammatical rules and work to understand the details about how the language works. This is a much different activity than simply speaking, engaging in conversation, reading books, and watching movies in a foreign language. Immersing yourself in language as an adult doesn't necessarily result in more technically correct speaking. You can probably pick up a language well enough to get by through immersion, but for technically correct speaking and a correct accent, you'll likely need focused study. The same goes for ballet. Simply dancing and following along in an open class and picking up combinations does not lead to more technically correct dancing. The skills of maintaining turnout, developing gracefulness, and finding the correct intent of port de bras don't necessarily improve. Though the experience, the breadth of vocabulary, the knowledge to be able to follow along does improve in the open class setting just following along. There's a big difference between learning the vocabulary and the breadth and perfecting the technique and the depth. Learning the vocabulary allows us to follow along in a combination, but perfecting the technique allows us to execute on the bigger skills, the high legs, the pirouettes, the higher jumps, and achieve technical, graceful dancing. It's much easier to pick up vocabulary by watching than it is depth, though it is still quite difficult for adults to pick up things without the details of how exactly the transition steps work and without an understanding of patterns and structures used in choreography. But technique, it is really, really difficult to know what exactly things entail just by watching. So what exactly does training depth entail? Well, herein lies the interesting dance between training breadth and training depth. Training depth of technique is a different kind of training that involves mostly standing still and working slowly through the details of the movements. Within all of ballet, breadth and depth are intertwined, in that you need them both to perform a variation. But they are developed pretty separately, and working on them both at the same time is very challenging. Working on breadth, learning new steps, is counterproductive to learning depth, and vice versa. How you get your legs to remain turned out, your toes pointed, and your port de bras strong is not through a waltz combination with 99% waltzing and 1% pirouettes. How you get your legs higher isn't with a complex adagio combination, and how you get your split leap isn't through a multi-pass grand allegro, culminating in one split leap right before the end of class. The skills required for depth are trained at the bar by teaching your mind how to think more specific thoughts about how to execute the movements. For depth, seek out training and teachers who train your mind and body how to actually accomplish this. At the bar, it's very common, especially for adults, for the teacher to only be saying what the steps are and what the combination is, but not what's actually important for depth. The best teachers for depth are going to be people who started later in life, who teach adult dancers regularly, or who have had an injury or some other event that caused them to rebuild their technique as an adult. Someone who is a natural turner likely won't be able to help you figure out how to turn if it's not working for you. When these things are so ingrained and as natural as breathing, they're hard to teach. So the steps and combinations that we perform at the bar, this is the breadth of vocabulary. They help keep us in sync while we train, and they help you with the skills involved with breath. But the steps are training an entirely different facet and often hide the fact that at bar, what's the most important thing is training the muscles. If our mind is 100% focused on the combination and what comes next, we are not leaving enough room to focus on technique. Ballet training, this is a little different than dancing, should be teaching you how to direct your body and your muscles, not exclusively about remembering the combinations. And again, that is important. It's just a different thing than this. Your mind creates turnout. Your thoughts help you remember to turn out your legs, and your brain activates the muscles. If your thoughts are stressed about what comes next, there's no room for technique. So here's an example of what the teacher is saying when they're teaching breadth. If you're reminding that the combination is when they're counting it out, they say 5, 6, 7, 8. We go front and close, front and close, front and close, plie and stretch. Now to the side. Okay, that's cueing breadth. If someone's cueing technique, the cues are going to be a little bit different. They're going to talk more about what's happening and less about what to do next. So tendu front, feeling the heel go out first, toes stay back. Close and lift the front of the hips right as you close. That moment right before you close, lift a little more. Tendu front, heel even more forward. Plie, pressing the knees back and the hips forward. And so this is helping you train your thoughts on what they should be thinking while you're executing different movements. To become more technically correct in your dancing, you need to dedicate thoughts and mental space to thinking about how to move, not just what step comes next. Eventually, your body will do this without supervision. In the same way that you learn to drive, and every time that you went to switch lanes, you used to have to think, okay, blinker, blind spot, hands on the wheel, and go. But now you can do it while singing along with the music, thinking about your first meeting at work, or the kids screaming in the back seat. But initially, you had to think those thoughts in order to train your body to do it without you. So we still haven't quite gotten to the crux of what we're doing at barre, right? It might still feel a little bit arbitrary, but the way the barre is laid out is not arbitrary. So sometimes I get the question, why are we spending so much time at barre and only a few minutes in the center? How are we going to learn to dance if we don't practice it? But right on the other side of that coin, I also get this sentence. When I watch myself dancing in the center, I can see all the things I need to fix. My legs don't stay turned out. My arms are all over the place. I can't land my pirouettes. My toes aren't pointed, but I don't know how to fix it. Well, the answer is that we fix these problems at the barre. Once we're in the center, it's just too late to fix the technique. In the center, while we're dancing, we have a lot to think about, and we need to rely on some motor patterns that we've developed at barre, and we don't have the time always to micromanage our technique in the same way as at the barre. We need to begin to trust it so we can dance. We have a lot more things to worry about in the center. So as we talked about with the driving analogy, if the first time you tried to change lanes was the highway, your little checklist of the blinker, the blind spot, changing speed, and changing lanes would go right out the window. So you practice that skill on smaller streets, get the hang of it, and then you hop on the highway. At the barre, the order of the exercises is also crafted in a very specific way to warm up the body temperature, to activate the muscles that don't do as much work during our daily life, and then train these movement patterns of bending, straightening, power, balance, moving your legs, moving them to the front, to the side, to the back, from plie, lifting them, all of that stuff. Oftentimes, the combinations also alternate between slow and fast to train your muscles to be able to work differently in sequence, to be able to do a slow waltz and bust out a pirouette, to be able to do slow movements followed by quick movements. But also, the barre choreography is typically designed to help you understand a specific concept or a movement. Sometimes, the choreography will also purposely distract you from thinking about your technique so you can practice focusing on your technique in the face of chaos. And as a side note, as a teacher, it's very useful to see what happens to the student's technique when their mind is confused and not able to micromanage. As a teacher, we can see where the technique is already on autopilot and which parts fall apart. This is very useful to know how to structure the training going forward. So sometimes I might want to confuse the dancers so that I can see what parts of their technique are autopilot and what parts they're still working to manage. So now that we've kind of gotten an understanding of what we're trying to do with ballet mode at the barre and then applying that to the breadth of vocabulary in the center, how do we do it? Well, the act of noticing and correcting is the key to training. So once you know the goals of the movement, which muscles to activate and what correct looks like, there's a huge gap between knowing and executing. What we need to do is build awareness so that you know when your body is most likely to revert back to human mode and train it not to. The mind knows what should be done, but the body takes a while to catch up. It can be a little frustrating, honestly, when you know that your toes should be pointed and that your legs need to stay turned out and that you need to keep your elbows supported, but that it takes a while to get it. So this part requires a lot of dedication, and a lot of it will be invisible. It's the invisible key to ballet. So what kinds of activities and training will get you from knowing what to do and then to getting your body to do it without you thinking about it? First of all, most of it looks and feels like nothing. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, it's barely Instagram worthy. It's putting your body in situations where you can train it on what to do. So we stand still in first position and try to maintain activation in your hips, cores, triceps, and neck, maintaining this while, for example, counting to 60. And then just notice when something has lost its engagement and get it back. It's this act of noticing that is so key. Noticing and learning what the sensations feel like when you use the correct muscles versus not. And then having the knowledge to re-engage the correct muscles when it's gone away. This is a very meditative act. In meditation, your whole goal is to notice your thoughts and, without judgment, bring yourself back to your focus, often your breath. When you're training depth of technique, you want to notice what your body does naturally when you're not looking. You want to become hyper aware of every movement, conscious or not, and be able to redirect it how you want it to be. You want to notice every time your body sneakily reverts you to human mode, because it will. That's how it's designed to protect you. When we're training this, what appears beginner is often actually advanced. Sometimes advanced class looks like how to stand still. Looks like learning how to make all the right muscles work in just the right way. Learning how to sweat standing still, and training your mind to stay clear, present, and focused through it all. Now again, as I said in the very beginning, not everyone enjoys this activity. You don't have to. To be clear, you really don't have to. Adults have so many choices when it comes to what they want from ballet. All adults, I believe, should learn the basics of how to stay safe. How to keep your hips under control to protect your lower back, how to keep your ankles stable, and how to keep the knees tracking safely over the toes. Let's say I want all adults to be at a level 3 or 4 on a scale of 10 to technical depth. Anyone learning ballet should get at least there for safety. But for the next levels that I'm describing here, if this isn't why you love ballet, then arguably you don't have to work on it. But if you do love this stuff, let's talk a little about 3 different settings where you can learn this. Private lessons, practicing by yourself, and learning in group class. Just like changing your accent when you speak, this skill requires awareness and seeing what your body does in the micro movements during a movement. Private lessons are amazing and super helpful to get real-time feedback on how your body moves and see things that you may not see yourself. If you have the resources and availability to seek out private lessons, I highly recommend it. Seek out a teacher who can help you with your technique, who will work mostly on standing still with you. Ask them to work on deep technique, ask to work on first position, ask to work on only tendus and pliés, as those are where your body learns the fundamentals of how to stand, how to bend, how to straighten, and how to move the legs in a rotated position. But I truly believe that private lessons shouldn't have to be the norm. In the quest to make ballet more accessible and reach more people, I hope to give you and dancers everywhere the tools to get a lot of the way there in a more affordable way with group classes, studying on your own, and watching videos of yourself. When you're in group class or practicing by yourself, a skill you want to get really good at is body awareness, self-correcting, and how to know if you're doing it right. Your goal with this facet is to learn about the technique checklist and the thoughts that you want to be thinking so that you can take class at any level, anywhere, and have a checklist of things to remind yourself of. And the key is know if you got it, whether that's by feeling, using a mirror, or a video. Training this in group class or anywhere that doesn't have someone telling you when you're getting it right requires extraordinarily humility and curiosity. You should always be checking if you can turn out more, pull up more, etc. You must always dance under the assumption that you need to turn out more. If you hear the teacher say, even more heel to the front, and you think, well, I already did it, then you're missing half the fun. When I was starting ballet, I remember in the group class, the teachers would say things like, turn out your legs more or more core, and I'd think, well, I already did that. I already turned out my legs, so this correction must not apply to me. That's just not true though. The goal is to always try to coax more from the muscles, always try to turn out more, pull the belly button up more, stretch your ankles more, all of that good stuff. Remember, gravity is constant and human mode is powerful, and your body is always trying to Be more efficient and go back to the things that make your life easier. So we always need to turn out more, always need to lift more. We're never done with these things. Video can be extraordinarily helpful for this. I think it's more helpful than the mirror because how things feel when you're looking at them is not often what they actually are. The feeling that you're doing it impacts how it looks to you in the mirror. You can think that you're turning out your legs because it feels hard, but then when you watch a video, you can see it more objectively. Having a removed perspective of yourself by watching it on video, especially if you can wait a bit of time before you watch the video, is helpful. But videoing yourself can be really hard. In this episode especially, you might have started to see why we did the mindset episode first in the beginning. Because the first time you see yourself on video, you might want to give up immediately. If you have one of those inner critics like I do, it might tell you that you look terrible, that you're doing nothing correctly, that everything is wrong. What are you even doing with your life? But don't give up. Just set that voice aside. It's all part of the beginner ballet process. It's not going to be perfect from day one. How could it be? How could it be? Learning this stuff is difficult. We all pass through the beginner level. So watch the video and keep going. Video is very unforgiving because it shows you exactly what is happening, which is why it's so helpful for this type of work. It's the same as training for how you speak, whether you want to remove filler words or change your accent, you have to get a clear picture of what exactly is happening in order for you to make any sort of changes. But again, like I said, if this isn't your cup of tea, private lessons can also give you this sort of feedback without having to watch yourself on video. And of course, you don't have to love this facet. Now, when I talk about practicing at home or working on this stuff in group class, I get questions like fears and anxieties that you'll be practicing incorrectly, that you'll develop permanent bad habits, and that bad technique is dangerous. So when it comes to encouraging self-study and encouraging self-corrections, I think I have a little bit of an unorthodox opinion on this topic, which perhaps come from all these years of teaching hundreds of adult dancers and seeing that you can get wherever you're going no matter how you got there. People have come to my classes and walked through my doors from all kinds of backgrounds, whether they learned as kids, started from scratch as an adult, did it from watching YouTube videos, started with bar classes at the gym, or came in having no experience at all. Pretty much as long as they've kept coming, they've all got where they were going. In my eyes, especially with adult ballet dancers, there's no such thing as a permanent bad habit. Why? Because our whole goal in ballet training is to become hyper-aware and be able to change our habits. The idea with training is to notice what you're doing and be able to change it. So if you get a bad habit, you already know how to fix it. You've already developed the skill to change your habits, so you can surely change another. I favor the idea of getting really good at changing your habits, getting really good at the meditative aspect of ballet training, of observing, of changing, of noticing. Once you start assuming that you can't change what you're doing, that's when our training hits a plateau. So I say be a little careful in general of falling into this mental trap of the idea that you have permanent bad habits that need to be corrected. When a dancer learns something new, sometimes I'll also hear a really stressful reply that, "Oh no, I've been doing it wrong this whole time." But the thing is, we can't skip ahead to future concepts. So first, we have to learn the beginning. The first time we do a tendu, we're surely missing 100 different things, but we have to start in order to get all of those things checked off. When our eyes are opened and ready to be going on to the next level, we see new things that we didn't know about the whole time. This doesn't mean that we were necessarily wrong or that we're permanently ruined. It means that we have a new habit to work on. We're not fighting bad habits. We're in the business of building new habits, tweaking and existing our habits. The top skill here is to observe your own dancing with humility, kindness, and an open mind, always ready to tweak, change, update, and grow with new information. Get insanely good at building habits, at observing what your body does sneakily and changing your patterns. So I want to make one more point here on the difference between adult beginners learning technique versus returning to ballet as an adult after having learned it as a kid. There's a big difference between the group of people who are returning to ballet after dancing as a child and people learning fresh as an adult. So when we're returning to ballet, people who are returning oftentimes still remember the movements, they remember the ballet mode, they remember things, but the body can't always execute on it. So sometimes people return to ballet after decades of time away, and the body still has ballet mode intact. The body hears the ballet music and activates ballet mode almost without their knowing or doing. From what I understand, it's a pretty eerie experience. As someone who started as an adult, I've never had this experience with ballet, but I have had it with listening to music. Like when you haven't heard a song in 10 years, you've completely forgotten about it, but when it comes on the radio, you can somehow sing all the words to it. You're having kind of an out-of-body experience watching yourself sing all the words. It's like swimming or riding a bike. Like I have no idea how I can float in a pool or keep a bike upright. I know I learned these things and I have memories of struggling to learn them, but I don't know how it's done. I couldn't teach someone else how to do it, nor could I describe to you what my body is doing to make these things happen. But no matter how long it's been since I floated in a pool or rode a bike, I can still do it. I might be out of practice, get winded quickly, or not have as much control over steering, but my body didn't forget how to do it. Returning to ballet is sometimes quite similar. Oftentimes people think they'll be starting from the beginning, but if they took ballet, especially at least to ages 12 to 14, certainly through the teen or early 20s, ballet mode is sometimes very well intact. The longest break I ever saw was 50 years. An 80-year-old woman came into my Denver studios, having not danced since age 30. Ballet mode was completely intact, and she had just the most beautiful développé with a presented heel, turnout completely intact. Interestingly though, for people returning to ballet, I found that some love to work on this depth facet as an adult, but others don't. Some love the details and some prefer to just dance. Learning anatomy later on sometimes can be a really fun and interesting experience for people who have this muscle memory that they developed as a child. Sometimes they find it fascinating and love to learn more about how their body does what it does somehow without thinking. Others, though, can have a really strong negative thought pattern reactivated by technical cues. Depending on their early training, digging into the how and working on this type of training can bring up bad memories or trigger negative thought patterns, especially if they were taught to beat themselves up in order to learn the technique. Some teachers teach their dancers to feel badly or ashamed when their bodies mix human mode and ballet mode. They teach with embarrassment or humiliation, and sometimes these early traumatic experiences can come right back up if the dancer focuses on technique. These adults oftentimes will enjoy themselves much more if they don't really dive into the how and they just enjoy doing it and dancing with what their bodies remember and feeling the music and loving the experience. All of this is a very different experience from adults who started completely from scratch as an adult, or adults who maybe only took ballet until ages 11 or maybe 12 and ballet mode is gone. Adults, as we know, we've talked about this a lot, start at drastically different places with their knowledge and their bodies. Over an entire lifetime, adults diverge quite a bit with their strength, flexibility, injuries, knowledge, experiences, and need a very different way of learning than kids. Depending on what strategies that you've developed in life through in your particular unique human mode, ballet can be more or less difficult to learn for your specific life experience. Injuries such as car accidents, issues during pregnancy, scoliosis, broken bones, sprained ankles can cause different strategies in the body to develop. Horseback riding, gymnastics, ice skating, these all come with different strategies too. In our early childhood, if we were skateboarding, skiing, crawling, playing, swimming, our coordination will be drastically different than someone who maybe didn't do these activities. Some of these strategies are more or less compatible with ballet mode, making some things more or less difficult to learn. Some may take more time to develop coordination and control than others. Some might find turning easy, but footwork like waltzing difficult. Adults learn everything at a very, very different pace in a very, very different way than kids learn these things. So to pull it all together, these top skills that come from depth of technique can feel really elusive and like no one is teaching you how to get them. It can feel like either you have them or you don't. Either you have your extensions or you don't. Either you can land pirouettes or you can't. In my eyes, that's simply not true. You can learn it. This stuff isn't magic. It's just anatomy and physics. Turnout and technique can seem mystical, but it's really just a collection of muscles that we're training to work together in an unorthodox way. There's no roadmap for your specific body and your specific set of unique life experiences, but the framework is the same. We might have unique anatomy and unique history of injuries, development, and more, but we walk together on this path of ballet, even in our uniqueness. And the thing about journeys is that happiness never comes magically at the end. We find happiness along the way, which makes it easier to come back day after day if we actually enjoy it. The best news of all is that we're not in a rush. We have our whole lives ahead of us, so let's take our time, relish in the details, and have some fun learning about ourselves and the world along the way. Thanks for listening. For more adult ballet, you can dance with us in our online studio with over 20 hours of live Zoom classes each week, including pre-point and point, or our on-demand technique library with structured courses, variations, and recorded live classes. Don't forget to follow our studio on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Broche Ballet. I'm Julie, and this was Broche Banter. Happy dancing!